Welcome to part 2, guys. Motor problems. This old Johnson motor has been giving me problems from the beginning. Over the last couple weeks, I've been tinkering with this thing and finally got it up and running. So let's take a look at what all I had to do with it to get this thing in tip-top shape. All right, first things first, I'm trying to kick off this motor first thing in the morning, and it's just not wanting to happen. Sprayed some lubricant in the starter on the sprocket. That way, it's moving parts and you don't want them to be dry. In a second here, I walk out of frame and you can hear me spray, and it's starter fluid into the carburetor. The engine itself will kick off, and then it will shut down after about a second or half a second of running. So there's a little bit of troubleshooting I've done. Only one thing left to do. Let's pull it apart and get after it.
Whenever they make one of these, they put everything in a spot where you can't get to it.
Okay, in this clip, I am taking the solenoid off so I can replace the main lines off of the solenoid that go from the battery to the back of the solenoid, through the solenoid to the bottom of the starter or to the front of the starter. All right, so as you can see here, I have removed all these wires off of the back of the solenoid, and I put the nuts and bolts back on it. Well, when I came over here to remove this wire, let me show you here. This guy right here, it was not completely seated up against the solenoid itself. It was just kind of free spinning. So if there was any play in that, that could have very well been the reasoning why I was having such a hard time with this starter, or the engine starting. So that could be part of it. But since I've already got the new cables, I'm going to go ahead and replace them.
Red power cables. Now, I know it doesn't really matter, guys. The color of the cable doesn't matter.
All right, so I've got the negative and the positive main cables ran to this engine from the battery.
All right, the cables were not the main problem with this engine in the long run, nor was it the problem with them not being completely connected on the solenoid. But it was definitely a factor that needed to be taken care of, and it could have caused major problems in the future. All right, to get everything together on this boat and getting it up to running, after changing out the power cables and testing the fuel out of it the day before, drained it, hooked new fuel up to it, and I started going through once again, why can I not get fuel to my motor? That's why it would click, bust off, and then stop. And it should have brought me into this conclusion first, and I could have just saved myself a lot of heartache and went straight to the carburetor. Now, the carburetor. All right, I took the carburetor off, and I ended up cleaning out the jets once again. Guys, I wish I had the footage to it, but I do not. So here we go. Take the carburetor off of the boat engine itself. You only have a couple bolts and nuts, but it is kind of a pain to get to. So this nut right back in here needed to be taken off, as well as the one on this side. You have to take this front plate off as well, so you can disconnect the choke down here. And then you also have to disconnect this linkage rod here. Coming around on the other side, I elected to take the starter off because I had it tested already. So I ended up taking this U bracket off and sliding this to the side, taking this nut out, taking the ground off, and then taking this bolt out down here. When the solenoid is taken off and then I take the starter off, I can easily start working these nuts off. So what I had to do was take the nuts and loosen them as quick as, or as back them out as far as I can, and then pull the carburetor back down the bolt or the studs, and then loosen them, and it just was a continuation process. Once I have taken the carburetor off, I took the carburetor apart. Once I had the carburetor completely off the engine, I was able to take the carburetor's top from the actual float tube down here where all the fuel sits. Ended up taking a needle and cleaning out the jets, and then cleaning out the reservoir down there as well with WD-40. It's all I had. Yes, you really want to use carburetor cleaner, but I dried it out with WD-40. As you know, it's not a lubricant, it is a cleaning solution. So that's what I used. And then I took and put everything back together, came over to the fuel filter itself and took the fuel filter apart, cleaned out the fuel filter, made sure the hose wasn't clogged up, blew out the lines from this line here to the actual gas tank itself. Now guys, it was a big upset that I didn't have all the footage of me breaking this engine down completely and going through the carburetor step by step. All I can say is there are other YouTube videos out there of mechanics taking the carburetor apart and going step by step, making sure that the float in the carburetor reservoir is actually in the right position and everything is copacetic when you put it back together. All right, we're about to head out on our maiden voyage. I had this thing purring pretty good the other day. Just started it up, started right off the bat. I know eventually I'm going to end up having to replace this gear selector. It keeps popping out of neutral to start it, so that if you're not used to it, you'll definitely think that you're stranded. Hopefully, knock on wood, nothing bad happens. I got one paddle. I'm going to head downriver because the wind is blowing from the north. So if I do get stranded, I can pull anchor and just float back. That is the plan. So think about that when you're doing stuff, even though you may want to fish that way. This is the first time I've been going out on this. So anyway, popped the cover off after it was spitting, sputtering, and dying, and just this screw here on the carburetor that allows so much fuel to go in, and it seems to be doing just fine now. So I'm going to slap this cover back on it, and we're going to go see if we can't put some catfish poles in the water and catch something.